Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of My Jewish Learning, doing some weekly Torah. Our friend Ben, if Ben would like to, can give a better introduction to what this weekly class is, but I'll be your host for today, Rabbi Mark Goodman. Go ahead, Ben.
I think you just did it. Welcome everybody. I'm Ben Harris. I'm sitting in today for Julie Seltzer, who, if you're a regular, is generally the matron of this community. It's good to have you with us. Today we're going to be led by Rabbi Mark Asher Goodman, who I will tell you about. Rabbi Goodman is the spiritual leader of Bris Shalom Jewish Center in Erie, Pennsylvania, and he lives and teaches in Pittsburgh. He's been a Jewish educator for 20 years, and he likes texts from the Hasidic tradition because they probe our own personal stories and struggles by using Torah as a vehicle for self-examination. He recently completed a book, Life Lessons from Recently Dead Rabbis, Chassidut for the People, which he hopes will be published soon. He's also a big soccer fan, a competent skier, an accredited archery instructor. He has one misdemeanor conviction for political protest, and he has a turtle named Lefty. So we are thrilled to welcome this morning Rabbi Mark Asher Goodman, and I will, in just a moment, place a link to the source sheet in the chat for your reference. Rabbi Goodman, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Well done. Yeah, so that's me. I mean, I basically kicked it to Ben so that he could read my bio, which of course I wrote myself anyways, so kind of ridiculous. But today we're going to do two things. Normally this is Parashat Shavua, learning the weekly Torah portion. Today, because it is also the festive holiday of Purim, we're going to be doing about 15 minutes of learning on Megillat Esther, the book of Esther. And we're going to be doing something that's pretty wacky and weird and pretty out there. So there's a tradition of something called Purim Torah, where rabbis kind of like teach intentional nonsense, which is so absurd that it makes completely no sense and is ridiculous. There's a wonderful version of this today. If you like Purim Torah, farcical, humorous, Jewishy things. Trua Rabbis, which is a wonderful social justice rabbis organization, has a great example of it up today. I'm sure a lot of your local Jewish papers will also have one too. This is not going to be Purim Torah in the way that I just described it. This is going to be Purim Torah in the kind of traditional way. It's also going to be a weird, wild, mystical journey through a Hasidic text that is deeply Kabbalistic. So if, I don't know how many people drop Kabbalah here in the weekly Torah portion class for MJL, but if you are of that ilk, of that bent, if you're comfortable with it, great. If this is your first introduction to Kabbalah, great. I'm planning on doing it just for like 20 minutes. And then I'll do a little bit on this week's Torah portion so you feel you didn't get short-changed as you go into Shabbat and you want to learn a little bit about things. Again, you guys hopefully have been sent this. It's in the chat. You can access it offline, but I'm going to share screen with you guys right now. So yeah, so of course the story of Purim is this incredible story of the battle by Mordechai and Esther against the forces of evil and indifference, the forces of evil being Haman and his wife Zeresh, boo, and the forces of indifference being King Ahasuerus, who seemingly has no idea what's going on while a man is plotting genocide within his own kingdom. There's a lot of weirdness and wildness to the story. It is strange and farcical, which is why we do farcical Purim Torah as one of our traditions. But one of the additional things that's interesting that you may or may not know is that the book of Esther is the only one in which God's name is not explicitly mentioned in the entire Hebrew Bible, okay? So the rabbis are very perplexed by this. Why would we have a holy book of Judaism in which God does not actually appear in any way, shape, or form? Well, there is a tradition that God does appear mystically and secretly in the book. And that's going to be the topic of our Hasidic commentary for this morning. The way in which the rabbis interpret, when I say the rabbis, I generally mean the Talmudic rabbis, although basically everybody after the Talmud qualifies as well, as long as you went to rabbinical school or were ordained. But the rabbis intuit that every time the phrase Ha-Melech, the king, appears in the book of Esther, it's a secret reference to the Melech Malchei HaMlalchim, the king of kings, not Budweiser, but God. Okay, so that is setting up for the text, which we're going to take a look at right now, if it is properly displaying on my screen, and I believe it is, because I teach this kind of stuff all the time, and I'm almost as good at Zoom at this point as I am at teaching Torah. So take of that what you will. All right, so in Esther, one of the more famous lines, one of the more fantastical lines, is chapter 4, verse 16, which reads like this: Lech knas et kol haYehudim hanimtzaim b'Shushan utzumu alai va'al tochlu al tishtu shloshet yamim, yada yada yada. Go and assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I shall perish. So this is the heroine of our story, Esther, speaking to her uncle Mordecai, and Esther is explaining to Mordecai what the people need to do in order to defeat the evil decree of Haman, who is planning on exterminating all the Jews as his power of being Grand Vizier for the kingdom of Shushan and King Ahasuerus. This is a perplexing line, right? It's strange on multiple levels. Level one, where did Esther get the idea that this act of having everybody fast 3 days and 3 nights would do a good thing, okay? Normally, you wouldn't have a character in a story without divine guidance tell the people what they should do spiritually in order to avert an evil act from happening. So one, God is not pushing Esther to do this. Esther is pushing Esther to do this. Okay, that's interesting. Thing two, specifically, why fasting? Okay, you who are out there all know that fasting is a very common thing for Jews to do as an act of repentance, right? When Jews do a bad thing, we spend the end of the year repenting for our mistakes by fasting at a holiday called Yom Kippur, right? We fast, we don't eat, we don't drink for 1 day. Thank God it's not 3 days and 3 nights. That would be hard. I don't fast very well, so I don't know about you. So the question, why is Esther saying to do this? Like what's going on here? Why have it happen? So I'll add that the dramatic line at the end, avadati, avadati, if I am to perish, I shall perish, because Esther's afraid of, revealing herself to King Ahasuerus as a Jew. King Ahasuerus picked a pretty bride out of a beauty pageant. He was not counting on picking someone who happened to be of an ethnic minority within Persia, who would then turn around at some point and beg for a special request from the king. Okay, so anyways, that's the setup. The person that we're going to be looking at this morning is a guy by the name of the Meor Einaim, the enlightening of the eyes. His name is Menachem Nachum Twersky of Chernobyl. His descendants include the Twersky family today. Abraham Twersky is a prominent rabbi who just passed away. May his memory be for a blessing. He was an Orthodox rabbi who lived in Pittsburgh, but also spent a lot of time around the country setting up drug and alcohol rehab centers for individuals. And recognizing that the Torah of the universe is that people should not struggle with addiction. So he also wrote something like 30 books on mental health and substance abuse. And he was extremely renowned within the world psychological and substance abuse community, in addition to the observant Jewish and the Jewish overall community. So a great man who is the great-great-great-great-grandson of this guy, Menachem Nachum Twersky of Chernobyl. So we're teaching a little bit this morning in memory of the blessed Abraham Twersky. So the Meor Einaim says this: and thus, in regards to Esther, it says, and fast in my behalf, do not eat or drink for 3 days, day or night. Those that return in repentance, this is the secret of Bina. Okay, so Bina is, when we're talking about this, Bina is one of the 10 mystical sefirot, right? There is a belief that God has 10 divine emanations, 10 ways in which the divine interacts with our world. So just like human beings have different aspects of themselves, and we are created in the image of God, so too God must have different aspects of God's self. In order to know God, we should understand the different qualities and aspects of the divine. And so when we experience splendor or beauty, we are experiencing one of the aspects of the divine as it's been made manifest to us as human beings. When we experience strength or power, we experience God's gevura. When we experience mercy or loving kindness, we experience God's aspect of chesed, right? So these are all different kind of ways in which we know God and which God interacts with the world. I'll add one more thing to this. There is a God that is very, very close to us, right? The immanent God, as some of our philosophers describe that divine being. The God that we experience in the universe, right? When you see a beautiful flower, when you see a baby born, when you have a great personal moment, right? And you feel high, that's the God that you know in the immediate. And then there's the God that we can never know, right? The transcendent God, the God who lives on high. That transcendent God is beyond, and is also beyond comprehension, right? There are things that we human beings just can't conceive of. Worlds beyond. If you just want to be scientific, you and I will never know what the sun looks like on a strange planet billions of light years from here. Although we know that it exists, we just will never conceive of it. On some level, that is something like what the transcendent God is. That God is present and able to discern and know things that we human beings are never capable of knowing. Okay, so when he's talking about Bina, I brought a chart, don't worry. He's talking about one of the divine aspects of God. There are 7 lower sefirot, which human beings can access through experience in the world. I listed them here, but we're not going to go through all of them because chaval al azman, we don't have enough time. But there are 3 higher worlds which are inaccessible to the human being. Those 3 higher worlds are known as Bina, Keter, and Chochmah. Bina, Keter, and Chochmah. Bina is often translated as kind of understanding. And that is part of this kind of divine world where only God can kind of understand on a certain level. Chochmah is wisdom, which is kind of a divine knowledge, which again, humans have no access to. And Keter is the 10th sefirah, so high that we will never even begin to explore it. So when rabbis write about Keter, they write all sorts of beautiful things, and then they usually discount it at the end by saying, oh yeah, by the way, I have no idea what I'm talking about, because nobody really knows what Keter's like. Okay, so the Me'orei Naim is playing at this by pointing out that this concept of why Esther is riffing on repentance must be related to this highest world of God, the secret of Bina. He keeps going. On this, Esther was, the secret of Esther is the hidden Aleph, the expanding from the outer garments and revealing the clear light. And it is called the Scroll of Esther. That which is hidden will be revealed. So the thing that I started our class off with was mentioning that the book of Esther is the book where God's name does not appear. Aha! God doesn't appear explicitly, but God's name is hidden throughout the book. The Scroll of Esther and the name Esther, the Hebrew word Esther, is spelled Aleph, Samech, Taf, Resh. If you cut the Aleph off of the word and you just went with the last 3 letters, Seter, Seter is the Hebrew word for hidden, right? To be Hester is to be hidden. So if you add an Aleph to the word hidden, you get Esther. And that's what this line that the Me'orei Naim is riffing on. The secret of Esther is the hidden Aleph. So where we're going to be going with this in a second is Aleph is also a kind of secret, sneaky, hidden letter by itself, right? If you know anything about Hebrew grammar, the Aleph is a letter that if you don't put a vowel underneath it, it makes no sound, meaning it has no action. It is hidden unless you vocalize it, right? Unless you add an ah or an eh or an e to it. So the aleph is kind of hidden, and the following 3 letters are the word hidden. And those 4 letters together make the Hebrew word Esther, the heroine of our entire story. So what the Me'or Einayim is getting at is God is hidden in Esther, right? So who is the person who declares this 3-day fast? It is Esther by way of the hidden God, right? There is a hidden God within Esther that is decreeing this. It's a neat move. There's an additional move here that happens. He says, the Me'or Einayim says, the expanding from the outer garments and revealing the clear light. So in Kabbalistic Hasidic thought, right, the world around us that we all see is not the real world. We see the klipot, the outer garments of this universe. The inner spiritual world is the true world. And the Hasidim often refer to this, and the Kabbalists often refer to this as the world of clear light, right? Which is a really amazing kind of metaphor, right? If you take a light and you cover it and you hide it completely, you won't see anything. But if you reveal by going through the different garments, right? Here in Pittsburgh, we have the experience that for months and months, weeks and weeks on end, we may not see the sun. It's cloudy every day. If you're in Seattle or Portland, you can relate to this. But you know the sun is there, right? If you sweep away those clouds, that light is hidden behind them. And that's what's going on here. God is hidden as this light within Esther. And moreover, there is the Scroll of Esther. And that the whole name of the book, amazingly enough, is actually that it is not called the Scroll of Mordechai, another one of the heroes of the story, not the Scroll of King Ahasuerus, not Sipur Shushan, not the story of Shushan, not the story of, the Jews of Persia, all of which would have been legitimate names for this book. Also, to add to that, typically books in Hebrew are named after the first significant word that appears in the book, right? The book of Exodus in Hebrew is called Shemot because it's the second word in the book. Here, the name Esther doesn't appear for the entire first chapter, or for most of the first chapter. And yet that's what we call it, Megillat Esther. And the Me'or Einayim is saying this is a pun, and the pun is this is the book of that which is hidden will be revealed. We'll do a little bit more. We probably won't finish this text because it's deep and wild and crazy. And I taught a version of this class on Wednesday and spent a little bit more time on it. It's good to get practice, right? So he continues, and thus our sages raised the question on Esther. From where do we find Esther mentioned in the Torah? And it is written. And where do we find Haman? And it is written. So what happens here is the rabbis of the Talmud derive that Esther is hinted at in the first 5 books of Moses. And the line that they are hinting at is quoted from the Talmud, right? And the line that it is quoting is down here. And it says, I will hide haster astir, my face on that day, for all the evil which they have wrought, in that they are turned to other gods. Okay? So God, in Deuteronomy 31, mentions that when there will be a time in the future of humankind where the people Israel will do naughty, naughty things, and God will turn away from the people. And it will seem like God has disappeared. And yet, God is actually not gone, but just hiding. And the book of Esther is this entire book about the hidden light of God being hidden behind the natural world, behind veils and garments that we must work to pierce and go through. That we must work hard to kind of perceive and understand. I'm going to skip to kind of the last little bit of the text where it says this, and the act of discernment discovers and brings out. Thus it is that Esther is the secret of Aleph, right? The secret of hiddenness. When we look in Torah for Esther's origin, it says, Va'ani, Anochi, I, God, and this is the name of God that starts with an Aleph, interesting, will hide my face. This is to say, that which is the secret face is hidden away by outer garments. And it is amidst these outer garments that we must peer through and penetrate through the layers until we come to the aspect of face to face. So the only person who ever met with God face to face was Moses. And the purpose of the Jewish life is to attempt to perceive, go through all the outer veils, all the clouds, all the confusing, weird stuff, and try and get to the core, right? Try and get through the BS, the Narishkeit, the silliness of the world, right? The annoyances, the traffic, the Starbucks points, the things that are like, tertiary or tangential to what is core to what it is to be human, which is being good and kind and doing mitzvot, trying to find the divine in our fellow human, trying to find the divine in our world. That when one comes to understand that in every matter, the Shekhinah, the divine, is hidden. So the story of Purim, to kind of conclude in this Kabbalistic retelling by our friend Me'or Einayim, the Chernobyl Rebbe, is the story of Purim is the story of attempting to know God and understanding that God is always hiding. And we are playing a divine game of hide and seek. I will add that one of the things we do at Purim is we are told that because there's a lot of dressing and undressing in the story, and there's a lot of hiddenness and revealedness, that we should wear costumes. It's one of the fun things we do on Purim, because we all wear masks. And the big thing about Purim is that we put on a mask so that we are unmasking. We reveal and we conceal. And we recognize that in our concealment, we learn that we have revealed something, not only about ourselves, but about God, God's self. All right, that's all I have for Purim. With the remaining 8 minutes, because I do not want to cheat you from getting real serious Parashat Shavua, I'm going to give you just a little bit of Torah from this week's Torah portion. Maybe you'll be like, Rabbi Goodman does way too much. And the answer is, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Maybe I'm like one cup of coffee too many for your average rabbi. And that's fine, right? I'm fine knowing myself, right? You should see me on 3 cups. Okay, this week's Torah portion is Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh is the Torah portion that deals with kind of, if you were to be blunt, in general, the boring stuff. Which is, we've been given the 10 Commandments. We start to explore some of the important laws in a couple weeks ago's Torah portion, as you all probably know, because you come regularly to this class. And in this week's Torah portion, we get a bunch of stuff about the clothes that the high priest should wear. And the clothes that he should wear are kind of strange. He wears linen vestments and linen pants. He wears a me'il, this strange, funky headpiece that's carved in gold. And then he wears special shoulder pads, and he wears a breastplate with 12 stones signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. So what's going on here? Well, the Hasidim are going to have some fun with this, and we'll get as many in before Ben says, you got to stop, Rabbi. There's a couple lines here that are interesting. So the first is Exodus 28, verse 12, says the following. Attach the 2 stones to the shoulder pieces, which are called the ephod. I don't know why. As stones for remembrance of the Israelite people, whose names Aaron shall carry upon his 2 shoulder pieces for remembrance before the Lord. So now we have this thing where we've got these shoulder pads with jewels on them. And of course, the commentators are going to ask, what's up with that? 2 lines later, we get another line, and this one's about the breastplate, okay? Va'asita choshen mishpat, maseh choshev, kamaseh ephod ta'asenu. You shall make a breastpiece of decision, worked into a design. Make it in the style of the ephod. Make it of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen. That final line appears over and over and over again in this Torah portion, and most rabbis can unfortunately or fortunately sing it from memory. It's just how it goes. So what's going on with these lines? We have a couple interesting commentaries. The first one is a cute one. Simple, straightforward, not a lot of work. The Be'er Mayim Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Turar of Chernovitz, who at the end of his life of being a rabbi in multiple towns in the Ukraine, actually made Aliyah to Israel before he passed away and lived in Jerusalem. And the Be'er Mayim Chaim says this: precisely the jeweled shoulder pieces are on his shoulders, not here, but here on top, and in no other place, to be instruction by their very image, as if Aaron was to carry the people Israel on his shoulders, as a man carries his son on his shoulders, to protect him and save him from all ill, wild beasts, from impediments and snaring rocks. And thus for the generations that there was a Kohen Gadol. He guarded us from all ill by his merit, and such that he was suitable, the Holy One, blessed be, shined God's countenance to that generation on his account. So I love this little text. It's really simple, because if we imagine the Kohen Gadol as, in our modern era, Jewish leadership in general, right, the important people at My Jewish Learning and 70 Faces Media, like Ben, then we are thinking about how our leaders, we rely upon them to carry us through the tough times. I think we could think larger as Americans about this and think about what leadership truly means. But all of us, to some extent, are leaders in our communities. And there are times in our lives where we need to put our communities on our shoulders and carry them and get them through all ill, wild beasts, impediments, and snaring rocks. Just a nice idea, right? Why are the stones on the shoulder? To remind the Kohen Gadol he's carrying the Jewish people. Okay, the next text is a little bit of wordplay for those of you who like the crossword puzzle in the New York Times every morning, or spelling bee if you're playing the spelling bee game. I like the spelling bee game. My wife is really good at it. Okay, the letters Choshen, Chet, Shin, Nun are an inverted anagram of the word Nachash. Nun, Chet, Shin. And the word Nachash in Hebrew can mean one of two things. As a noun, it means snake. As a verb, it means divination, right? People who go to palm readers or do tarot cards on Venice Beach or in Times Square, right? That would be called, in Hebrew, lenachesh, to divine, right? And it is, you probably know, explicitly forbidden in Torah. To learn via divination. Divination is that which utilizes strange powers in order to reveal a matter that is not known. Thus, Choshen is clarifying in revealing that which is hidden by forces that are holy, the Urim and Tumim. So the breastplate is this 12-jeweled thing that the Israelites would go to, that the high priest, the Kohen Gadol would wear. And when they wanted to know the answer to a difficult question, they would ask him. And so the Kabbalah, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg of Hamburg, is doing a pun. And he's basically saying, like, there's a holy way of accessing knowledge, and it's done through, in this case, the Urim and Tumim on the breastplate. And then there's an unholy way of doing it, which is, tarot cards. So this is a mild polemic against tarot cards, but another way of saying it is find a spiritual way of accessing answers to our questions. Don't get mixed up in garbage theology or voodoo mysticism that may or may not come from a legitimate source. And I'll leave it to you guys to decide what the legitimate source is. The final one, which I like, is just a lovely text. Before I say that, I have to say something about our friend, the Soferet Julie Seltzer. Julie Seltzer, many, many years ago on Purim, was dressed up as the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate with the 12 stones on it. And Julie had a button behind her breastplate, and when she clicked it, it lit up with one of two responses, either Ken, the Hebrew word for yes, or lo, the Hebrew word for no, meaning that she had a breastplate that literally was like the Urim and Tumim. You could go to it for your decisions. It was like kind of a magic Ouija board or a magic 8-ball. Final text. The breastplate of decision, the Choshen Mishpat. It is called that because it atones for the perversion of justice. That's the quote by our eminent French Rabbi Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, who lived in the 12th century. But our commentator, the Akedat Yitzchak, Rabbi Isaac ben Moses Arama of Spain, who was expelled 2 years before his death and died on the island of Sicily in the town of Napoli. He says this: "These were stones that were divided evenly between precious stones and inexpensive stones." So there's 12 stones on the breastplate, right? And he would say like 6 of them were really valuable, diamonds and rubies and topazes. And 6 of them were like, common, quartz and agate and onyx, stuff you can get for a couple bucks in any store. And he says this reminds us that in relations to matters of justice, the law regarding a penny must be treated equally to the law of $100. And by that he means at least one of 2 things. One, he means judges and society should operate with justice equally for rich and poor. The other way is we as human beings need to be as careful and punctilious in how we are honest in our business dealings, as much with $100 as with a penny, right? My grandfather was an accountant, and at tax time, he would say, you can claim $500 deduction on this and not a penny more, right? He was an honest man. So we ought to be honest in our own dealings. When the cashier hands us a nickel too much at the grocery store, the Jewish thing to do here is to say, excuse me, you gave me back 5 cents too many. All right, and in that way, we reveal the divinity that is all around us in honesty, in justice, in kindness, and in cleaving to Torah. Amen, amen. Happy Purim, everybody. Have a great Shabbat. And if you want to stick around, if we're not too over time, I am absolutely happy to take a couple of questions or comments.
We can stick around for a couple minutes if folks want to ask some questions. The chat is open. We can probably hang out for about another 5 or so.
Great.
If anyone wants to jump in.
We have some questions in the chat. Does olive oil come from olives? Wow, I have no idea. That is a great question. Debbie asked if the class I taught on Wednesday was recorded. The answer is no. I stopped recording these classes because nobody was downloading them. If you're bored and you want to see all sorts of other classes that I've taught, this is like my flavor, the thing that I do. They are all on my website, rabbimarkashergoodman.com. I have a number of audio recordings. I have a number of text packets that I've posted. I've got like months and months of material up there that very few people are actually looking at. So I'm happy for you guys to take a look at that. A question about, is the English translation of Me'or Einayim available? There is. It is probably hard to get. I'm looking on my shelf. Here it is. It's a book, a series that's out of print. One of the great things about teaching on Zoom is I have all my books behind me. So I can be like, the Zohar says this, and the Talmud says this, right? The Talmud's down there. No offense, Talmud. So this is the book if you want the Me'or Einayim. It is actually only his commentary on Genesis in translation. It is also out of print. It is an amazing series which has been out of print for 20 years called The Classics of Western Spirituality. And if you had like $1,000 or $20,000 or whatever, and you went and bought every edition of this, because it's all spiritual wisdom from every religion, you would become a spiritual genius and master. But this one, I believe, is translated by Art Green. And Art Green is one of the most important neo-Hasidic scholars of the 20th and 21st century. He's also the dean of Hebrew College in Boston. He's written like half the books on that shelf also. I would love to meet Art Green.
I will just add, if I could,
Yeah,
Rabbi Art Green has a new translation of the Me'or Einayim that either just came out or is about to come out.
Wow, that's huge knowledge, and I can't wait to buy it. So he has this old version of just the first tractate. This is the book. It's Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl, Upright Practices and the Light of the Eyes. The Light of the Eyes is just a translation of his nickname, the Me'or Einayim. Another book by Art Green that I highly, highly recommend, which is a great translation, is... Boy, we're just selling Art's books today, aren't we, Ben? This is totally... I should be selling my book, except it hasn't been published yet. this is an amazing book called The Language of Truth. Also by Art. It's a translation by Art Green. He went through this massive series by a guy named the Sfat Emet. Sfat Emet is a wonderful author who wrote a lot. And like a lot of authors who write too much, some of it's gold and some of it's less than gold. And Art Green kind of edits it and finds the really great stuff in it. So Language of Truth, which is still in print and you should be able to get easily, and The Light of the Eyes. Okay, anything else? How can we get a copy of a book you are writing, and is there a special code where we can get a discount? It needs to be published first. I am still grinding through the exceedingly not fun process of final edits. I have like 5 more chapters to touch up. And in addition to that, I started by trying to get the book out to the most people possible. And the way to do that, by the way, if any of you are literary agents and would like to take on a client, I'm available. But the process has basically been asking people, sending out lots and lots of material into the universe and getting rejected over and over and over again. It's kind of like being a middle school boy at the dance, although with really, really, really bad luck on top of that. So Lisa Left asked me where I live. I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the rabbi of a really tiny congregation in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I teach online also. I teach a Melton class on Tuesdays, and I teach a Chassidut class on Wednesdays. And you can find all that through my website if you're interested.
I think we're going to need to wrap up at this point, Rabbi Goodman. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Wish you all again a happy Purim and a Shabbat Shalom. And please come back. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.